Hey YouTube, what's up? Today I really want to talk about a concept that I talk to a lot of newer players about. Um, but that topic is the idea that being a better player makes you a better person, and vice versa. The idea sounds very silly when you put it that way, which I think is a good thing. I I think the ways that people internalize it are a lot harder to spot. They don't really outwardly say it like that, but I think a lot of people believe that and operate under that idea. And I think it's really important to call that out and to make it a point to notice it, because if you don't, I think it can really negatively impact not only your journey as like a melee player, but also in just your experience with the community in general. So, what is important about addressing this thing? Why am I even bringing it up? Well, it's really common. I think the place that I notice it the most is when someone's kind of newer to the community, whether it's on a local level or like maybe online. A lot of people tend to enter the scene with this idea of like, oh, I'm going to get better so that I can be noteworthy, or I can have some like, I can have my value in this community by being a good player. I think it comes from a place, it, it starts with this idea. Skilled players tend to be respected. That is kind of to be expected, right? I think, you know, melee players, like, we are well respected in our scene. There's honestly a lot of romanticization. I don't know if I said that right. Of like skill in melee. Like, you have the five gods of melee, and you have like the king of smash, and you have, you know, all of these names, these documentaries, and a lot of these storylines. And honestly, just the reputation of melee in general has kind of been this idea of like, this game is really difficult, and if you're good at this game, you're a nerd, but you're a really cool nerd. And you're a lot of really good melee players are very, very well respected in a bunch of different circles. And I think people enter the scene with that idea, but they turn it into something like, oh, I need to be good at the game in order to be, you know, a person that's relevant and valuable to the scene. And I need to get PR in my local region. If not, I'm just a nobody. And I think that's when it becomes a bad thing. Um, I'm gonna only really talk about the perspective of like the individual and the ways that it affects your individual experience. I think there's a greater conversation to have on the ways that this idea could be perpetuated in the community, but I think that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff that needs to be like spoken, and like I would need to think and like flesh out a lot more. So I don't really want to dive into all of that. I am just going to be talking about on an individual level. Um, because on an individual level, I think the main thing that is important to note about it is that it really adds a whole extra barrier of difficulty in your melee journey, right? Because melee at the end of the day is a hard game. You're going to need to spend a lot of hours practicing tech skill, establishing, some sense of, once you're over the hump of being able to move your character around, now you're going to have to think of strategy. You're going to have to not only understand, you know, your own characters and your own characters' objectives, you have to understand other characters, and you have to understand, the mentality your opponent has, and you need to execute and react and recognize scenarios with very little like bits of information. There's a lot of stuff going on all the time. And on top of all that, there's a lot of self discovery and a lot of ways that you're going to have to confront yourself with the game. You're going to be playing while anxious. You're going to be dealing with loss and a lot of the emotions of losing. You're going to have to be dealing with, external factors like distractions and, expectations and all of those things. And it's a lot of stuff that you're going to need to work on. And when you don't have this concept of, you know, or rather, when you do have the concept internalized that you are not valuable to the scene or that you're not valuable as a person in this community because of your results, um, it makes it even harder to do all of those things. Um, and it's interesting because I didn't really notice this until after I started traveling a lot. I'm very thankful and I was very blessed with a community that very early on this idea was kind of instilled in me, but it was packaged as a way to not gain an ego. It was delivered to me a lot more like, don't get a big head just because you're good. You know, it doesn't matter how good you are at the game. That doesn't mean you're allowed to treat people poorly. Was basically how it was like communicated to me, and I internalized that, and I was able to kind of reverse engineer it for it to go the other way around, where like, you know, in the same ways that I don't, that I shouldn't like treat people differently just because I got better at the game. The same would happen if I didn't have good results. Like at the end of the day, I think people are very sympathetic towards people who have bad results. Like maybe online there's like a lot more trolls, but I think on a local level, and I think even just people who are a part of communities in the scene, they're very sympathetic. Like, oh, you had a bad tournament. That sucks. Hope you do better at the next one. Like that's how a lot of people tend to think. Or honestly, they probably just don't think too much about it. Or they're like, oh, you lost. That's cool. Or that's crazy, and they just move on because they're not really thinking about it too hard. Like that's probably the most common experience you're gonna have when it comes to like people that you talk with Melee. You know. Um, and so it's important to just understand that like the stakes of losing, um, losing sucks, and you're gonna have to deal with a lot of the extra stuff that I was talking about before. But when you start associating losing with this idea that you're losing your status in the community, that people are going to dislike you now, or people are not going to like care about you as much because you have bad results and everything, that's when you start having really, really dangerous, you know, there's a lot of dangerous negativity that comes from losing, and that's definitely not what you want to set up. Melee is already like difficult enough with everything else, and you're gonna need to lose in order to learn. You're gonna need to lose to, when you're trying out new things, or you're gonna be exposed to things you're not prepared for, and you're gonna lose because like you can't help not pass a test that you didn't study. And it's not your fault. It's not like you could have really known everything that you were going to encounter, and you kind of need to be exposed to something like that in order to figure out like, okay, I guess I'm going to go focus on this new area now. But when you start seeking validation from like the community via results and via getting better, you're going to have a lot harder time with dealing with all of those things. You're going to start, I think this is where a lot of people start focusing on short-term results. They just want to get ranked, and so they'll just like, they'll switch characters a lot to try to get like a better result. And like if they find one good friendly where they like did well with the character, they'll just be like, okay, yeah, it's time to switch to this character now because I did so well with them. Or you know honestly, it's really a big source of demotivation, because if your main like target in your journey to get better is to feel like you're welcomed, or you feel like you have a place in the community, you're going to need to keep it up for like your entire career, and that's not healthy. That is not a way to get better at the game in a sustainable way, because at the end of the day, you know, that it leads to burnout. And if you're not going to, eventually you're going to find a result that you're not going to be pleased with, and if you are not ready to sustain through that feeling of loss, and if you start associating this idea that you don't belong because of that loss, then you're going to burn out and you're not going to want to play anymore. You're going to be very demotivated, and it's a really, really sad experience that I've seen a lot of people go through. And it's not just from this. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why people get burnt out or demotivated in general, but this is a big potential pitfall that you can fall into if you're not aware that that it's there. And I would say the one thing I would really want to point out is that it's not really your fault for believing this, because society as a whole kind of is structured in a way that subconsciously tells you that this is the case. I like to use the example a lot of schooling, and specifically the grading system. We are kind of taught early on, like, yo, get good grades to lead to success, and you're like a better person for that. And a lot of people who are successful and have good grades and who get like nice jobs, like, they are really respected highly, and they're also valued highly. Like, and there's not a lot of people who talk about how, or it's kind of taught like, oh yeah, having more money doesn't make you a better person automatically. And obviously we know plenty of examples of people who are shitty people despite them being, being rich and having good grades. But a lot of society kind of teaches us to believe that success means that you're more valuable as a person. And so when you go into the Melee scene, you don't really know anybody, and you see the way that Melee players are perceived for being good, it's pretty natural to just be like, yeah, this is what I have to do. I certainly start off the scene kind of thinking that as well. And I was very lucky to have people in my life that pointed it out before it got into like this crazy. And I definitely have struggled with this concept. And sometimes I slip up, and I still do, right? And it's just because it's so internalized. There's it's really hard to not believe that, like, man, like, I need to like really perform well, because otherwise people won't care about me. But the reality is that, the Melee, the whole idea of the community is that, we're here for shared interests. Like, we're playing like Melee. Like, the whole reason why Melee skill is romanticized is because it's a really cool and interesting game, and a lot of people in the world do not know about it. Like, obviously Melee is very big and it's very well respected, but not everyone knows about it. Or even people that do know about it, they may not know that much about it or care about it because it just doesn't line up with their gaming interest or their interests in general. So the people that do know about it and who do care, that's the real reason why we all are here, especially on a local level. Like, for me, coming from Louisiana, like, we really don't have that many players, and we never really had that many players. And for me growing up, I didn't have a lot of people that I played video games with. I was homeschooled, so that kind of cut down a lot of my opportunities to have like people with mutual interests. But a lot of the things I was interested in didn't really have anybody there to share that with. And Melee was one of the first experiences I had with that. And it was, obviously it changed my life to all the way to this point. But it would have been very different for me if I were surrounded by a lot of people who only really valued me for how good I was at the game. I was lucky, I think, in that situation. I got good pretty fast on my scene. But it probably did help me to some degree that I got good. That probably like gave me more opportunities. But I also can say that, like, one of the first people who really reached out to me, Taylor, the one who kind of taught me about this whole ego thing, like, I didn't like get a good result and he pointed me out. He just recognized me whenever we were at a card shop together. For like, I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh and he was playing Magic, and he just like noticed, like, oh, like, hey, you're that kid that went to that tournament. Like, that's sick. We should play sometime. Like, it was very like, it didn't matter if I was, good or not. It was just that I had a shared interest with them, and he knew that, like, it comes very few and far in between. And that's where the value is. It's that, like, you are valuable because you are here, you are a person, and that's really it. And of course, this doesn't automatically mean like, oh, you play Melee, you are a good person automatically, I guess. Like, I do want to emphasize that in the same way that, good player doesn't mean you're a good person. There's a lot of good players who ended up being bad people. You obviously need to be more than just a person with shared interests in Melee to, like, be a good person. But this isn't really a topic of like, oh, like, what part of your role in Melee makes you a good person. What makes you a good person are, like, the way you treat people and all that shit, right? But this is more so a focus on like why it's important to separate the idea that being good at the game is tied to your worth as a person and as like a member of the community. That's the point of it. And one thing I really wanted to point out as like kind of the tip that I would say to help address it, I think it's really important to notice if you're labeling this concept as being hard on yourself, or rather like holding yourself to high expectations. um, I know that for me, I tend to allow myself to bully myself as an excuse to be like, well, I'm being hard on myself so that I'd perform better. There is a difference between seeking excellence and allowing yourself to abuse yourself, basically, right? So I think wanting to work hard and push yourself and trying to, do the most that you can is a good thing when you're trying to get better, and it's a healthy thing, especially because it's a performance and it's a competition, and there's a lot of good things with having high work ethic and wanting to push yourself, right? But when you enter the realm of saying things like, oh, well, I need to get these results because otherwise I'm shit, or I am garbage, I need to fix that because, like, I don't want to be shit. All of these like really negative perspectives on it. It is unhealthy, and it does lead you down this rabbit hole of negativity where you're creating the extra baggage. Now you're seeking short-term results, and then when you lose, you feel like you don't have a place in the community. You need to win in order to have a place in the community, and then you burn out and demotivate. And that's not the goal, right? And I think that's why it's really important to don't believe that you need to be mean to yourself, and like that's valid as a way to like hold yourself to higher standards. Like that's not, there is a way to do both that's like healthy, high, seeking the best player, to be the best player you could be, while also like not being unreasonable. I think that's the trap, is this idea that you're giving yourself excuses by not being mean to yourself. You're giving yourself excuses by saying like, oh, well, I need to like, I need to respect myself. I need to like, treat myself well. And how you may be confusing that, or you may say that phrase and then be like, oh, well, I actually know, like that's an excuse. I need to not give myself excuses. I need to be hard on myself so I do the thing. And that's, I think that's where there's an issue, is like when you start using illogical things to try to gain a faster experience, like getting better. And I think it's really, really important to never cross the line of like unreasonableness, or at least not doing it consciously. If you want to admit, I'm just going to be ridiculous right now, and I'm just going to, say that like whatever, I need to just like push myself, and I need to work through this because I'm a shit, and I need to like, I'm a shit person, I need to get this shit done. If you can say that phrase but also like recognize that you're being silly and like you're not actually speaking within the realms of like reasonableness, then I guess that's fine. But if you genuinely believe that, that's when it's an issue. No, you should never have to cross into like actual unreasonable territory, because it is unreasonable to actually associate being bad at the game as being, as actually being a bad person. But if you recognize that that's the case, then you can navigate it in a way that's maybe not healthy, but, at least is within the realms of reason. And, as long as you recognize what you're doing, I think that's good. But it's really just important to, everything you do is a lot better as long as you completely recognize that the idea that being bad at a game means that you're like a bad person. Like if you can, or that's not the case. If you can understand that phrasing is, or like that concept is ridiculous, then you can probably navigate it however you want to. I really do genuinely think that a lot of the ways you deal with this is just to kind of recognize that that's the case. Because if you operate in any way that may suggest that concept is the way that it is, I think it usually leads to a lot of really awful outcomes. But if you can recognize that that's the case, then it's usually a lot easier to be like, at least from my own experiences, a lot of time whenever now that I've internalized that, it's a lot easier for me to be like, okay, I just lost, and my brain's like kind of trying to like be really abusive to me, but I recognize that my body's just doing the thing that it's been taught to do, which is to like treat myself poorly after I lose, and I'm just gonna have to wait it out. And sometimes it even gets to the point wherever I have like a stray thought, like, man, I'm like a garbage person, and like I'm like inferior now. Or sometimes my brain will just kind of wake up and be like, well, no, that's really not the case. It's, it's that's just not how that works. And sometimes that's enough to kind of like snap me out of like my funk whenever I lose. So honestly, that's why I think it's just important to recognize that it's a thing, because that may just be enough for you. But anyway, that's all I really had to share. So let me know what y'all think. I'd really appreciate, if y'all could like share your experiences with this, and like, maybe I'm wrong and maybe this isn't so common as I think it is, but from my experience, it seems like it's a really common issue. So let me know down in the comments below what y'all think. And let me know also if you have any questions about, competition or your own challenges and mentality, and I can try doing a video on it too. So thanks for watching. Until next time, bye.